Code of Virginia 46.2-859, passing a stopped school bus, prima facie evidence. I've been told this is the one where if a police officer witnesses you do it, this is the charge you're going to have. And it's a lot heavier than the 46.2-844, which we will probably go over next. Basically, a person driving a motor vehicle needs to stop when approaching from any direction on any school bus on a stopped highway, private road, or driveway. So they're basically telling you you have to stop for a bus no matter what. When discharging children, elderly, or mentally or physically handicapped persons. But here's the big part. You shall remain stopped until all persons are clear of the highway, private road, or school driveway, and the bus is put into motion. That's the one thing I see a lot of people not know or ignore. I always wait until, so the arm can pull in. You're still expected to remain stopped. I always wait till I see the wheels start turning on the bus before I go forward. Any person violating the foregoing is guilty of reckless driving, and I'll get into that charge next. It's pretty steep in my opinion. The driver of the vehicle, however, need not to stop when approaching a school bus if the school bus is stopped on the other roadway of a divided highway, on an access road, or on a driveway, when the other roadway, access road, or driveway is separated by basically a physical barrier or an unpaved area. So sometimes you see those curb barriers that will run in the center of the road. I've been told that's a barrier. A Jersey barrier, those are the ones that are about waist high. Or just like a nice grassy knoll. Going on, it gets into a few other things about not needing to stop, but only if directed by a law enforcement officer or a uniformed crossing guard. And then it gets into 46.2-1090, which describes school buses. Title 46.2-844, passing stopped school buses, penalty, prima facie evidence, penalty. I'm going to give you the overlay first, and then I'll go through the points. This is a long law, and it's got a lot of facets to it. This is how I've been kind of explained, or how I've observed it works. A private vendor, the school buses belong to the school district. A private vendor will need to come in to equip those on a school district. But first they need a contract with the school district. In the state of Virginia, the school districts are separate from the cities or the counties. They work like two separate governments. So you've got a superintendent and a school board that runs the school district. You have a mayor or a board of commissioners or a city council that runs the city or the county. The school district will hold the contract to allow this equipment to go on to, and we'll get into those contracts a little later. The school district will then, vote to solicit this to the city council in some cases. The city council will then pass an ordinance to allow for the civil penalty part of this to be enforced in their jurisdiction. Again, usually school districts and the cities and counties neatly overlay in the state of Virginia. Some areas not so much in the country. Then what happens is the school bus vendor for the cameras will review the citations in some of the contracts. They will pass it over to the police that are run by the city. The police will sign off on it. Then the vendor will have the authorization to collect the civil penalty from you via mail. Okay, going through the points. Letter A, this is what links it to 46.2-859, but you're charged as a civil penalty. I'm not sure about the second part. You'll have to consult a lawyer. I do not know if they can also charge you with 46.2-859. I was told they can't. I was told this is basically the civil penalty version of this law. I've heard some stories. Again, we'll get into those a little later. The next larger section here States basically, if you get a ticket but you weren't driving your vehicle, you can file an affidavit with the court that you weren't driving it. I guess you're not responsible for that. Those funds are fees. And then 46.2-1090, this kind of links the testimony of a bus driver or whatnot to say, hey, that was a school bus, I believe. Again, not a lawyer. Part B explains what a video monitoring system is. It's basically video cameras or sensors that are recording you. This is number 2, is where the locality can then pass the ordinance to authorize the company to do what it needs to do. It gives the ability to mail out for citations. I believe there's no proceeding for contempt or arrest of a person summoned by mail. So I'm sure somebody smarter out there can jump into that a little more. And then there's a 30-day window on that. Again, we'll get into this really deep. A private vendor can contract with a school division. That's what number 3 allows. And then a bunch of little fees and fines they can add. Tech fees, late fees, and whatnot if it's not paid within 60 days. And then number 4, private contractor may enter into agreement with the Department of Motor Vehicles. So what this does is it allows, when the private company gets their citation, they jump into the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles. They find your information based off your license plate. That's who they're mailing the ticket to, whoever's registered to that vehicle. If they abuse the system and release private information, it's $1,000 per disclosure. Again, you can see how this law has changed a lot recently, 1997 out. So you can see how they've progressed and constantly rework things. Virginia, Title 46.2-868, Reckless Driving and Penalties. Every person convicted of reckless driving under the provisions of this article is guilty of a Class 1 misdemeanor. The Part B gets into if you were driving with a suspended license, or if somebody died from the sole result of you driving recklessly, you would be guilty of a Class 6 felony. And Part C, the 46.2-818.2 or 818.2 basically is if you have a cell phone or if you're using a cell phone while you do it, you'll have a mandatory minimum fine of $250. Title 18.2-11, Punishment for Conviction of Misdemeanor. For a Class 1 misdemeanor, Part A, confinement in jail of not more than 12 months and a fine of not more than $2,500, either or both. For Part C, that is the Class 3 misdemeanor, I believe the Class 3 misdemeanor fell underneath a 46.2-1090. If a bus driver shorted you your amber light notice, they would be looking at a fine of not more than $500. Virginia Stop Arm Camera Conclusion. I appreciate you hanging in there. I'll go through these points and then I'll run through the laws really quick. We went over number 1, the road perspective. The safety and engineering standards are not taken into consideration at distances, reactionary times, and standardized automations. Number 2, the bus perspective. We have conflicting standards of adherence, ignored laws and policies, and a non-standardized or replicated conditions for stoppages in traffic. And number 3, the enforcement perspective, a strict guidelines of punishment for the inability to adhere to what I consider an impossible standard. So a moving window where if all the conditions aren't met exactly correct, or somebody shorts you a second or two, you will get possibly burned with a ticket. Number 1, with the road perspective, we went over 46.2-880. And those numbers were slightly pulled from the VACDL section 2.6.1, the controlling speed. That was how much time you had to stop, or reactionary times and stopping distances based off speed limits, and how there were conflictions with 46.2-1090. That was the amount of amber light or warning light that a bus has to give you prior to that stop. 46.2-830 was the traffic light law, and I just wanted to put that out there to show the standardizations that an engineer will take to recreate a safe situation every day with driving. We went over 46.2-918 en route. That was the law that said a bus, if the roads were too wide or certain conditions, a bus has to pick that child up on one side of the road. The kid can't cross, or else it'd be a penalty against the bus driver, or I guess whoever created the route. But then that rose the question of, why do you need to stop on the approach if the lanes are too wide? It would actually put a risk onto you, especially if any center lane could block your view of that bus. So again, some states don't require you to stop on the approach when there's more than 2 lanes. I'll get into that later with some other videos. We went over Chapter 10, 10.2.1, the approaching stop. And what that showed us was, with the federal guidelines and the state CDL for Virginia, it puts the burden of the stop arm onto the driver. The driver is supposed to wait for the area to be clear and free, so they have to check. But a lot of times I have seen where, in almost every state, I've seen video where it shows a stop and pop. I've seen it on the road, but I've seen it on videos in other states as well, where the driver will come to an abrupt stop and not check for the area to clear and automatically deploy their arm. And what that does also is, if you're 2 to 3 seconds in front of the bumper, you will not have the reactionary time found in 46.2-880 to actually complete your stop. We went over the actual laws, 46.2-844. That's the video part where they'll write you a citation or a civil penalty and mail it to you in the mail. And 46.2-859, that's when an officer witnesses it, and that one can hold, I believe, up to a year in prison and or a fine in excess of $1,000, up to I think it was $1,200. That one can be risky also, because remember, when a police officer witnesses it, they're only seeing it from one perspective in most cases, and I've seen them follow behind school buses in other states to set up traps, but they're only getting one point of view, and all they do is see you pass. And then we went into 46.2-871, where they allowed the buses to go faster, but they didn't bring the stoppage safety requirements in line with that increase of speed. So when you're out driving, watch out for the stop and pop. Please do not brake recklessly. Again, the purpose of some of these cameras and some of these laws is to get you to stop for a bus no matter what. But if the reactionary times aren't there and you brake recklessly, somebody behind you might not have that time to stop. So be aware of not only the bus in front of you, but whatever's behind you. If you have a truck tailgating you or something, like I said, make those split-second judgments. Try not to hit a kid, God forbid, but also remember, if the kids are all on one side of the road and there's nobody running to get to the bus, you've got a semi behind you or something larger, just remember that semi also has reactionary times it has to adhere to. Will it have enough time to stop? They do sit higher, so they might have a better perspective, but just, like, again, there's a lot going on while you're on the road. Be safe on your morning commutes and your afternoon commutes and in the middle of the day, because they like to drive around there too. And good luck. I wish you all the best.